President Cyril Ramaphosa has told the United Democratic Movement's 40th anniversary celebrations that he believes Indian, coloured and white South Africans feel excluded from our public life. He also said that some white people had created lagers around themselves. Tessa Dooms is a director at Rivonia Circle. Tessa, good afternoon to you. Over the last few years, we've seen some public complaints about this. I think perhaps more people who identify as coloured making this claim. Do you think the President is right? Do people we still sometimes designate as Indian, coloured and white feel that they're excluded, kept out of our political conversation?
Well, I think the problem is much bigger than that, Stephen. What we must realize is that in our democratic era, what we've eroded is any sense of being a united country and a country that actually operates together in solidarity with each other and sees each other as part of the same country, the same cause, the same fate. And so what we've effectively done is we have failed to address the very things that apartheid put in place that causes these separations along the lines of race, gender, ethnicity, culture and so forth. So an example of this is the taxi industry strike in Cape Town. The impact that it had on people in Khayelitsha was very different from the impact that it had for people in Camps Bay, and that is divided along racial lines. So when your politics and your governance is not redressing the actual spatial divides, the economic divides, the social divides between people, then of course people are going to start feeling not only excluded from government and governance, but also excluded from the political projects that bring about those governance processes.
There's so many different things to look at this. I mean, in the end, we're talking about what the ANC called the national problem, the biggest issue that we face. I mean, youth unemployment is probably also the biggest issue that we face, but they're sort of the flip sides of the same problem in a way. Can there also be a difference between how people feel and objective reality? In other words, white people may say, my voice is delegitimized, my voice is not heard in South African politics. But that same white person may actually just have to get used to the fact that they are an ordinary South African and their voice shouldn't be as loud as it used to be in the 1980s, for example.
Yeah, I think that that's a different kind of issue. The question about how loud somebody's voice is very different from what kind of politics they feel they are able to participate in. I think what the President's point was particularly around the ANC and people's sense of the ANC as this convener of society and the leader of society, as it has always called itself, that was reaching across divides in the kind of politics that it ran, that built this rainbow nation mythology, inviting people from different backgrounds, particularly different racial backgrounds, into the fold. And so I think the ANC is suffering its own losses in terms of its ability to be the convener of society. But in reality, when the President says that white people are building lagers around themselves, they're building lagers around themselves because they see themselves as part of a very different South Africa than other people of other races, of other class groups, and are seeing themselves as having to put themselves against or protect themselves from. I'm from the colored community. Colored people still live in areas that were designated colored. Still feel like they don't understand where their political expression comes because who represents their interests in the dominant political party in parliament that has the most seats. We don't have constituency-based politics in this country, and I think that's where the core of it politically comes from. Where do I get my expression from? If I don't get expression in the mainstream, I'm going to create these smaller spaces in society to be in. And I think one of the arguments we've made at the Rivonia Circle is part of the reason why we're having this plethora of small parties, as they've been called. We've got about 325 parties that contested in the 2021 election. Our analysis of that is that people are not actually forming parties. They're forming ethno and regional and local constituencies because they're looking for political representation, and they're not finding that in the mainstream of politics.
There are other things to it. I mean, this is very crude and oversimplistic, and feel free to reject it out of hand, but the leadership of the ANC itself doesn't have the diversity that it used to have. I mean, the ANC still, and I've made this point so many times in the last 2 weeks, the ANC still really has been the only body going all the way from 1912 through to the Freedom Charter, go back as wherever you like from the formation of South Africa as a nation state, that at one point represented everybody. From around 2008, by my reporter's memory, you started to see the end of that in the ANC Youth League, to the point now where last year in the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, no Indian people were even nominated to the Provincial Executive Committee. I mean, that was something that had never happened before. So is this the fault of the ANC? Could the ANC defend itself and say, no, but it's society?
Yeah, I think it's the fault of all political parties in different ways. I mean, we could make the exact same claim about the DA. We could make the exact same claim about the Patriotic Alliance, is that we're now building our politics on the basis of new battles that we're fighting silently in our society. And it lands that way differently for different parties. In the ANC, what you're seeing is an amassing of political elites. And the fact that those political elites happen to be black is a very different thing from saying that it's just not racially diverse enough. No, it's not diverse in many ways because it's about a political elite. In the DA, it's about white people's economic interests that are, and cultural interests even, that are protecting a space for their political interests. In a party like the Patriotic Alliance, very unequivocally targeting colored communities on the basis of their political and economic disenfranchisement. And so people are forming their party or their politics around ethnocentric and class-centric issues. And I think the ANC is seeing the exact same thing. It's a class-based issue. And that class-based issue is then layered by political proximity to power.
How do we overcome that then? How do we have what used to be a progressive politics? I mean, many people are looking at the UDF message now, apartheid divides, or the UDF unites, apartheid divides. I mean, how do we go back to that kind of statement? I hate to ask this question, but if you had to have a referendum, is that what people want? I'm a bit nervous about the answer sometimes.
Yeah, right now, people just want to feel seen, heard, represented, known, and feel like in the political space, there's somewhere where their voice can be heard and expressed, and they're retreating to ethnic or localized or class-based politics because people like them are most likely to then represent their interests. And so there are two answers to this for me. One is we must recognize people's hunger for real representation in this country. So while we're talking about electoral reform around the question of independent candidates, even the New Nation movement who first took that issue to court and won in the Concord in 2020 will tell you that what they actually were looking for and after was a more constituency-based politics because people want representation. So in other countries in the world, your MP or an MP represents a geographic constituency, represents a group of people in society, not only their political party. In our case, the MPs only represent their political party. And even at local government level, where ward councillors should represent their communities, the political party's power reigns in on them. And that's one of the things we must break. We must move towards a place where South Africans can feel like they know who their representatives are. Those people can represent them and be held accountable. But on the other side of it, we also need a broader call for more solidarity. And I call it what I call radical solidarity. Interclass, inter-identity, inter-location solidarity, where we are not only thinking about things when they affect us. So I made this example a few weeks ago, controversially around the issue of the Kill the Boer song, that you can't only be upset when somebody's talking about murder when it pertains to you in a country that has 75 murders a day. We must be outraged whether it affects us directly or not. And that's the kind of South Africa that we need, that needs to go beyond just party politics and the vote, and a radical solidarity where we care about each other community by community and across communities, because we know that the fate of that community is going to impact on me, and what I do will impact on them.
The fact that all of this is happening, I mean, I realize that South Africa is unique in some ways. We have unique features, our Gini coefficient, our racialized inequality chief among them. Perhaps also our youth unemployment is almost unique. Other countries seem to be having similar things. The United States would be the textbook example of this. There's this sort of populism in places in Europe, the UK and Brexit. Are we very different from other countries in this respect? Is the same thing happening in other places? Or is our history is what makes us so different?
So it is a little bit of both. And I think that the common thing across those things, across the places that you mentioned, is the higher levels of inequality are, or the higher there are fractures in society. So in France, you see it playing out in terms of race. In the US, you're seeing economic inequality driving that. When you have high levels of inequality, that breeds this kind of fractious politics where people are kind of gravitating towards a very base level of organizing themselves. And democracy itself has been in crisis and continues to be in crisis, because where democracy is supposed to create more level playing fields for representation, you're still seeing that people of a particular class, people that have particular proximity to power, in different contexts for different reasons, end up governing as a minority over the majority in ways that are not representative enough. And so you're seeing that play itself out. But in a country that already has issues of high levels of division, a country that already has inbuilt, we are the most unequal country in the world. It is not hard for us to then find more reasons to, instead of unite and build solidarity, to just retreat to places of safety where we feel at least here I will be seen and heard. And so we do run, I think, unique risks. We're not seeing this, this kind of thing everywhere, just incidentally. It is in context where democracy is weakening, it is in question, and where you're seeing that representation is not holding to the full promise of democracy.
Tessa Dooms, thank you. Director at Rivonia Circle, really do appreciate the time this afternoon.